Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and now that the Switch is 5, it's time for us to look back on the past year and highlight 21 of the finest games that have come to the system in the past 365 days. To reiterate, for a game to be featured, it must have been released on or after the 3rd of March 2021, but before the 3rd of March 2022. So to anyone in the comments saying, "Where's Breath of the Wild?" I issue a respectful... Naturally, we couldn't include all the games that we wanted on this list, so we had to whittle it down using a series of different factors, such as... But anyway, that's more than enough waffling, let's dive right into things. Kicking things off, we have Eastward, a gorgeous sort of melding of Zelda and Earthbound and things like that, and managing to call back to all those classic, wonderful old games of yesteryear, but without being entirely derivative. In fact, it's not really derivative at all. Whereas so many games would be like, "Oh, do you remember the past? Oh, wasn't that great? Oh, you remember old things?" This game doesn't do that. It manages to stand out on its own and be its own entity without having to actually do just straight up referential nonsense. It does have some pacing issues, which is a bit of a shame, but it is a minor complaint when the rest of the game is just such a wonderful time. There's even a sort of a game within a game. You might classify it as a mini game, but that really doesn't feel fair to it, which is essentially kind of like an entire Dragon Quest JRPG in the game? A game within a game? It's just crackers. Next up, we have Mario Party Superstars. Do you remember how Super Mario Party was kind of going back to the roots of Mario Party? Well, this time they actually did it. I really enjoyed Super Mario Party. I really, really did. It was lovely to go back to the old-fashioned just going around a board nonsense, but suffice it to say, there was room for improvement. And that improvement involved going back to the original formula even more so. And they blink and did it with this, and you know what? This is easily the best Mario Party's been in about, 15, 20 years? How old even is Mario Party now? It's 23 years, I'm old, I'm getting older, and I'm going to die. I have to concede, not every board in this game is an absolute banger. Certainly things like Peach's birthday cake is an absolute snooze fest, but you know, there's probably some people out there who really like that. I think I've mentioned how I feel about Peach's birthday cake in the past, and people have had defenders come out. So fair enough. And overall, the number of boards isn't out of this world, but it's got online multiplayer. And you know what? It not only works, it works really well. Like, I sort of feel this is something that we should be celebrating back in like 2009. But instead it's 2022 now. But regardless of that, it's here at last and it is fantastic. Easily the best Mario Party game of recent memory. I just hope that Super Mario Party doesn't mean that people are confused and end up buying just one of them and they end up buying Super Mario Party, not Superstars. It's even then it's confusing. Next up, we have Fez, and although the creator is maybe not the most, universally celebrated person in the world, the game itself is absolutely to die for. I love Fez. What a simple idea. Basically, it's a 2D platformer, in essence, and sort of exploratory platformer, but you change the camera angle with, the left or right trigger, and it changes 90 degrees, and whatever you see is a platform. Like, your perspective is everything. It's an original idea even today, even given the game's age, and it's frankly crackers that it took this long to come to Switch, but it's here. It's finally here, and I played through it all over again when it came out on Switch again, and I just fell in love all over again. It's just such a wonderful experience. It's not too long, you dive in, you enjoy it, you get confused by some of the weird stuff that has to do with binary that thankfully you don't really have to do, and then you move on with your life, but you're just so much richer for it. Moving on, we have The Great Ace Attorney Chronicles, and I will still never be able to spell attorney. It's 2 games in 1 from The Great Ace Attorney series, if you can believe it. And what a pair of games they are. For anyone who doesn't know, it's essentially a sort of a courtroom detective I hate to use the term simulator, but game, I feel like I've used that word already too many times. It's beautifully written, kind of semi-visual novel-y in a sense, but with loads more gameplay to really sink your teeth into and to really grab your attention as well. There are some references to Japanese sort of tropes and culture that overall have been well translated and localized, but sometimes they can be a little bit obtuse. It's not a big deal though, but what is a big deal is what you get for your money, because these games are massive, and as I said before, there's 2 of them. If you want something long-term that you can really sink your claws into and really enjoy for a really long period of time, this is a great investment. Next up, we have The House in Fata Morgana, which for the longest time was actually ranked above Breath of the Wild on Metacritic. Then we came along, gave it a 9, and that dropped it down a bit. But a 9 still means it's fantastic. It's essentially a visual novel. I mean, way more so than the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. Like, this is through and through a visual novel. You'll make like 4 decisions. But if that's your jam, then this is easily one of the best options you've got on the Switch. It's around about 40 hours long, and then there's another 20-hour roughly long DLC, so you've got basically 60 hours worth of entertainment here. It's absolutely not going to be for everyone. Visual novels are something that you either love or you hate, and you need to be aware of that going in, so do bear that in mind. But if you're a visual novel buff, you'd be mad to miss out on this one. In a slightly different angle, we have Quake. Yep, it's the original Quake available on Nintendo Switch, and it's as good as ever. And this port has just done so well. You would want them to do well, obviously, because this game is blinking old, but even so, a slapdash, sort of 30 frames a second port would be arguably easier to do, but they bloomin' didn't. They went and did a proper job. It's great that we've got the Doom games on Switch as well, but Quake really is, although arguably very similar in many, many ways, it's also very much its own thing, and I just love it. Maybe it's the nostalgia talking here because I'm an old geezer, but I love Quake. I never got to play it when I was younger. I had a friend who had it on PlayStation, but I never really got to play it, and I don't know why. Maybe it wasn't his, maybe it was his brother's. But I always wanted to play it. It looked like a more violent GoldenEye to my childish eyes, and it's not that. It's really not. But it is still a first-person shooter, and it's a bloody good one. Whilst arguably it's aged to some people, I think that's absolutely fair to say. To me, it's not aged today. It's high-octane, ridiculous good fun, and it just tickles that nostalgia bone in my head beautifully. Next up, we've got Shin Megami Tensei 5, which, in a sea of different kinds of takes on trying to modernize an RPG, or technically, I suppose more accurately, a JRPG, it's going very much down the traditional route, but that's not a bad thing. Shin Megami Tensei 5 is still bursting with modern quality of life features, but keeps that original sort of same beautiful core of simple turn-based combat. I mean, arguably it's anything but simple when you get further down the line, but that probably comes down to your skill level, doesn't it? The narrative is absolutely crackers as you would want. The whole demon fusion system means that you've got loads of flexibility as well. Performance can be a little bit spotty in places, which is a little bit of a disappointment, but having said that, it can run on a unit that consumes 8 watts, which isn't a lot of juice. If you're an RPG fan, well, realistically, you've probably already got this game, but if you don't, for whatever reason, pick it up, and I guarantee you won't be disappointed. Moving on, we have new Pokémon Snap. I mean, when they announced this, I was like, they're finally doing a new Pokémon Snap game, and they've called it New Pokémon Snap. Silly title aside though, this is everything I wanted a new Pokémon Snap game to be, and it does it gorgeously. This game is an absolute just drop-dead gorgeous thing to look at. You take photos of Pokémon, that's pretty much it, but my god, the way you go about it, and just the way that they interact in the world is just so refreshing. You actually see Pokemon behaving as you realistically would expect them to in a real-life situation. You know, they're not just milling around or looking and waiting for something to interact with them. They're doing their own thing. They're surviving. They're being essentially animals. And that's something that we haven't really seen properly since the original Pokémon Snap. We've had glimpses with even things like Pokémon Channel, but this really starts to show Pokémon as the animals that they are. I wouldn't have minded a little bit more content overall, and you end up going back to the same places maybe a little bit too many times for my taste, but even then, it's just a joy to behold, and every so often I just go back in, I dip in, play for sort of half an hour, and I leave, and I've just got the biggest smile on my face. Next up, we've got WarioWare Get It Together, the WarioWare game on Switch. It's not that simple though. Previous games have used things like touch screens and motion controls and things like that. Not all of them, absolutely not. But having said that, none of them have really been properly simultaneous multiplayer-ly focused. Previous games did have multiplayer, but it wasn't quite really sort of the focus. It was kind of like more of a marathon-based challenge, and you were competing to see who could last the longest. Whereas here, you're working cooperatively, you're working together to reach a common goal. And even though on paper, in my head, when they revealed it, I was like, I don't really see how that's gonna work. Blinking does. It's fantastic fun with friends. There's some mini games as well, which I thought, oh, these are fun when I first played it, and I literally haven't gone back to since. But the actual main WarioWare style gameplay, it just works really well with these sort of moving characters around as opposed to just general sort of inputs in a way that I didn't think it would do. And when you've got different characters that behave differently, it can force you to have to really think outside the box at times. And other times it's painfully easy if you get the right character. But it's all good fun, it's chaotic, and you know what? It's a good. Next up we have Ni no Kuni Revenant Kingdom, which is a game that I fully did not expect to come to Switch, and it runs beautifully and just looks beautiful as well. I do miss Drippy running around shouting tidy in a Welsh accent, but this geezer's alright as well. I mean, he's no Drippy, but he'll do. And Ni no Kuni Revenant Kingdom manages to do so much and be such an engrossing experience, and entirely its own thing. I mean, yeah, you can draw comparisons to other RPGs and things like that, absolutely, but none of them really quite directly compare to Ni no Kuni. It's definitely its own beast. It is undeniably a bit of a time sink, but you know what? Sometimes that's what you want. You want something that you can go and play for maybe weeks or even months on end, depending on how much spare time you have, and this fits the bill beautifully with its fantasy, sort of almost children's story-inspired aesthetic and narrative and plot points. It is just like a fairy tale, but in a really nice way. Somewhat less of a fairy tale is our next game, Monster Hunter Rise. Oh my great goggly goodness. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I loved Monster Hunter World, but Monster Hunter Rise is just so much more. Monster Hunter World went in a very sort of more modern direction, which was really good and really bold and, sort of forced the series into, a more sort of modern sort of game feel type thing. But Rise manages to maintain that, but bring it back to the roots at the same time. I feel World went a bit too far. Rise is a beautiful, beautiful balance. It's all about hunting the monsters, of course it is, and I love that side of things to death. But one area that I feel does not get enough praise, and maybe people are praising this up the arse, I don't know, but I feel like even that's not enough. The animations of the monsters, they feel so real. I don't think I've ever seen a game with more natural feeling movement for such fantastical looking monsters. Like, you can tell that they did their research to an insane degree and the payoff is just masterful. It's yet another game on this list that is an absolute chonker, and with the upcoming DLC, it's only gonna get bigger, baby. Next up, we've got another really big game. We've got Disco Elysium, or Elysium. I say Elysium, but I think people are going to have a problem with that in the comments. When this game was first revealed for Switch in a Direct, I completely slept on it. I think just something about the way that it was marketed didn't really do the game justice, and then I got my hands on it, and whoo, boy, this game is out of this world. You want something different? You want something original, something unique, something that you're not expecting? Disco Elysium is your game. You play as a police officer, you can't remember what's going on, and better yet, the game drops you in something simultaneously so familiar in terms of setting, but so many things are just different and weird and wrong that you really start to feel like the character in the game, not knowing what's going on. And better yet, the writing is, honestly, it's the best writing I've seen in a game, you know, in the past year. Maybe if it's not the best writing I've ever seen in a game, it's damned close. You have this sort of narration come sort of internal monologue, and depending on your stats that you have and your perks, the game will sort of coerce you towards certain interactions with certain people, and it's all dialogue based. There's no combat in this game whatsoever. It's all about taking chances and working things out and being a bloomin' detective. But your inner monologue will say something like, they're clearly trying to hide something because of, you know, certain skills that you've got, and, you know, sort of maybe you should try asking them about this, and maybe that opens up a dialogue option, or maybe that dialogue option was always there, but now you know that that is going to yield a better result. And even then, sometimes you'll fail it, and you'll get really pants options as a result, and those are your only options, and you're forced down that road. It's a truly fantastic and really interesting game. It is not for children though. There's a lot of swearing, melancholic, intriguing, genuinely hilarious as well. I can't recommend this game enough. I can't believe I slept on it when it was first revealed for Switch, because my word, it's one of the most original and fantastic games I've ever played. Speaking of original, finally something different for the Pokemon series, Pokemon Legends Arceus. I know Gen 9's been announced at the time of this recording. Well, actually, it's not going to change because time's linear. But we finally have a Pokemon game that is finally doing something different, and it is Pokemon Legends Arceus. For one thing, it takes place in the past, and that's way more interesting than I ever thought it would be. You know, it's taking place like 100 years in the past, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. It's a fantasy setting, so it doesn't really matter. But you can just catch Pokemon by throwing balls at them, or you can battle them, and the battles take place in the world. It's seamless. It is a seamless experience, except all the areas are separate. That is a thing. This is just phenomenal. I mean, don't get me wrong, it has its flaws. Visually, it's a little bit basic, shall we say, and it doesn't exactly run great, but the gameplay loop is just second to none when it comes to Pokemon. Next up, we have The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD. Now, I wasn't the biggest fan of Skyward Sword when it first came out on the Wii, but having played the HD version now, I actually enjoy it a lot more than I originally did, which is good. The motion controls are still definitely something you're gonna have to get used to. I mean, you know, there is the controller option, but there's something weird going on with the way that it works, because you gotta like hold a button to then move the camera with the right stick, otherwise you're just gonna slash. I would have argued that the other way around would have been better, but nobody at Nintendo asked me. But even then, the dungeons in this game are some of the best the series has ever had. And that's not an easy task, because this series has had some absolute bangers. Like me, it may not end up being your favorite Zelda game, but still a solid entry in the series that otherwise you may have slept on in the past. I know I did. Next in line, is it even a game? It's sold as one, so it's included on this list, Game Builder Garage. I had never made a game before this, I mean, except for maybe in like the Labo VR thing, and this is somewhat similar to Labo VR's game creation software, the Garage mode if you like, but this takes it to a completely different level, and some of the things that people have made in this is absolutely mind-boggling. I've managed to make Fish Splish 2, That's about it. Reasonably, nobody's going to create something like Breath of the Wild in this. It's far too limited for that. But it's more of a toy box, more of a sort of a first-hand go at making a game and getting an understanding of the way that coding works. The skills won't necessarily translate directly to creating games, actually in like a proper, full engine or something like that. But the baseline knowledge, I'm sure, will give you a leg up. If you've ever been curious about making games, but you just don't know where to begin, I can heartily recommend this. It's not going to be the program that means you make your first amazing game that you can release on Steam or anything like that, but it's a great way to break the ice and really actually get into making something that vaguely resembles a game. Something you probably couldn't make in Game Builder Garage, it's Axiom Verge 2. If you know of the original Axiom Verge, you'll know that it is a masterclass in Metroidvania design and just being damn good fun. And this is the sequel, and they are not one to rest on their laurels. This is surprisingly different, but arguably equally just as delicious. For one thing, it's gorgeous, but more importantly than that, it's more open-ended. There's more variety in the different abilities that you get, and they're I'd argue a little bit more original. The previous one was fun, but the abilities weren't like super out there. These are a lot more dangerous. I don't really want to say loads because I think it's better to just play the game and experience it with as little sort of rigmarole as possible, but suffice it to say, if you like Metroidvanias, look into this. It's tough, but it's fair, and more importantly, it's fun. Next up, we have Neo: The World Ends With You. Now, when they announced this, we were a little bit terrified, just a little bit, that it would fall down in a few areas because the original was so bizarre, but so wonderful at the same time, that we were worried it wouldn't really be able to live up to that original hype. But the fact that it's in this list should suggest that it bloomin' did. At over 40 hours, it's another bloomin' chunker of a game, but if you think it's gonna be anything like those previous games in the list, you've got another thing coming, bub. The whole game is just oozing with style, and it could be argued that it's maybe a bit try-hard in the style category, but I think it's trying so hard that it kind of transcends that sort of bell curve and suddenly becomes good again. Like, it's trying so hard that now it's actually good. The combat goes hand in hand with that as well. The soundtrack is this frenetic, high-octane, just absolute masterclass of sound. There's only one other game like this out there on the Switch, and that's The World Ends With You Final Remix, which is the previous game in the series. It runs rather well as well. I mean, there are some frame dips, we're not gonna lie, but realistically, you're going to be having too much fun to even care about that. The whole thing feels like its own living, breathing world, and that's a bloody hard thing to do, and I think they've done it fantastically. Moving on, we have Death's Door, and I think the best way to describe this game is to give you sort of a general feel of the situation when it comes to indie games. Indie games are fantastic. They can tread new ground and do things that big studios would never dream of, but so often they will fall back into basically treading the same ground that previous games have done in the past, the AAA games of yore, and yet just doing them not quite as interestingly and not quite as well. But Death's Door, it's retreading old ground, and it's kind of a game that you've probably already played before, but it does it so bloody well, and it manages to be its own thing at the same time, even though the mechanics and the idea and the way that the game plays is very, very familiar. This game is arguably a sort of a Zelda-like game, but with little sprinklings of Dark Souls in there, which is about the most, typically journalist thing I could possibly say. But the quality of this game is so bloody high that it doesn't matter that it's arguably derivative, because what it's doing may well be derivative, but it's doing it so bloody well that arguably you can even say that it surpasses the games it's imitating in some areas. I mean, that's going to be down, I'm sure, a lot to personal preference, but my god, is this a good time. And you play as a bird, how can it be bad? Next up, we've got Subnautica. Now, I have no idea how they managed to get this running on the Switch, and it has some issues in places when it comes to performance, let's not beat around the bush, but realistically, this is the full Subnautica experience on the Switch. You can play this portably. And what an experience it is. The whole survival sort of crafting simulator type thing has arguably been done to death over the past sort of 5 or 10 years. But my God, is this one doing it so well. It's doing it so well. Just the fact that you're underwater makes it this entirely new experience, even though the game isn't that new. I went into this game with almost zero expectations. I was aware of it before, but I'd never actually played it, and I was just absolutely blown away. It's very rare for a game to really suck me in and actually invade my dreams, but this game managed it. It's infinitely rewarding, infinitely crushing when you lose something fantastic, but it just encourages you to be better next time and to be more cautious, or maybe just be a little bit more aware of your oxygen meter or something, Alex. But if this looks like something you'd want to get, I guarantee you want it. You want this game. Our penultimate game is Tetris Effect Connected. Now, you might be thinking, is that not just Tetris? And I suppose in a way, you're right, it is just Tetris, but at the same time, it's so much more. I mean, it's not. It's still just Tetris, but it's the experience! Tetris in and of itself is just one of the finest games that's ever been made. I don't think many people would argue with that, but this takes it and makes it something so much more sensual. And I mean, I don't mean that in a saucy way. I mean that in the sense of your senses, your eyes and your ears and your, well, just those, actually. It brings to mind a sort of a strange, almost parallel universe where Tetris has only just been invented, and it's this kind of surreal, sort of psychotropic experience. I mean, psychotropic's probably an inaccurate term to use here, but it sounds right, and that's what counts. Realistically, you will just be playing Tetris, but at the same time, you're going to have your senses tickled in a way that I don't really think you can expect, and really doesn't really come across in video. I mean, it does to a degree, obviously it does, but realistically, you need to play this firsthand. And if you do, and you like Tetris, I guarantee you, you're not going to walk away disappointed. This is the best Tetris game that's been made pretty much since the original, I would say, and for reasons I never would have expected. And finally, we have it, yes, Metroid Dread. My expectations for Metroid Dread after Metroid Fusion being so bloomin' long ago were so high, arguably too high, that I didn't think that they could possibly be realized. They couldn't be met. They just couldn't. And yet they managed it. They managed it in spades. When I first played it, I hadn't played Samus Returns, or, well, I had, but not properly. I hadn't completed it, but now I have. I've completed Samus Returns, and I can appreciate Dread on an entirely new level now. It is so smooth, so slick, so everything. Everything it does is so stylish and responsive and fun, and yet so effortless at the same time. I completed this game when I was taking a holiday in a caravan with my partner Sasha and my to-be mother-in-law, and I was just sat there playing this portably. I don't play many Switch games portably these days, I must admit, and it was one of the most engrossing experiences I've had in years. And I'm not going to talk about the conclusion at all, because that's something you should experience yourself. But my God, this game, just from start to finish, is just an absolute high-octane whirlwind of basically perfection when it comes to video game design. Now, I know it's not perfection. No game is perfection, and I'm going to say that through and through. But this is so close to it, so very close, that I really don't know what can compete with it, except maybe one of the mainline Mario games, because they're very good as well. Or Breath of the Wild. But the fact that it's even being talked about in conjunction with these other games means that if you haven't played this game and you like Metroidvanias like Hollow Knight or any of the other many Metroidvanias there are out there that are absolutely to die for, and you have got to play this game. You just flat out have to. My God, play this game, fall in love with it like I did, and just your life will be richer. That's a slight overstatement, but it shouldn't be. It is that good. It really is that good. And there you have it. 21 of the finest games to come to the Nintendo Switch in the year of the 5th year of the Switch. Did we miss something important? Probably. Let us know what it is in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, then why don't you meow outside the door of that subscribe button incessantly until I let you in, and be sure to check out NintendoLife.com for all sorts of lovely Nintendo related content. Thank you again for watching. Bye bye.